The galaxy had never known silence like this. Even the great halls of the Galactic Council, where empires rose, fell, and bargained for centuries, felt colder, quieter. Billions of stars burned outside, their light reflecting off the marble-like surface of the Council's core world. Yet within those walls, every species present held its breath, because the humans had arrived, and their ships were not silver or white, like the fleets of other civilizations. They were red, not painted red but stained. From a distance they looked like a migrating storm, 1,000 vessels moving as one. Each ship carried the mark of battle, scars etched deep into their armor, streaks that looked almost alive in the glow of the twin suns. To most it was horrifying. To the humans aboard it was memory. They called them the blood-stained ships, though no one could ever say whose blood it was. Some whispered it was symbolic, an artistic defiance of the Council's arrogance. Others said it wasn't paint at all. Whatever it was, the sight alone sent tremors through the gathered species. Humanity had finally answered the Council's summons, but no one knew in what spirit they had come. Peace, vengeance, or something far colder. As the massive doors to the Council chamber opened, a slow ripple of unease moved through the delegates. The human delegation stepped forward, their boots echoing against the crystalline floor. There were only 6 of them, unarmed, quiet, and dressed in simple black uniforms that bore no rank or insignia. They looked ordinary, almost disappointingly so. But every delegate who met their gaze felt it, the same weight, the same quiet intensity. These were not conquerors. These were survivors, the oldest of the alien counselors. His scaled skin shimmering like glass leaned toward his translator. "Why, are their ships that color?" he whispered. The translator paused, hesitant to repeat the words that had spread like rumor across the stars. "Because," it said at last, "they don't clean them. Not anymore. Long ago, when the first human ambassadors came to the Council, they were laughed at, called primitive, told to learn civility before speaking among gods. That was centuries ago, before the human colonies burned, before the Orion Wars, before the silence that followed. The Council thought they were gone, broken, erased by the violence of their own making. But they were wrong. Humanity didn't vanish. It evolved. It learned the language of stars and the logic of war. It built ships from the ashes of old worlds and memories that refused to fade. And now they were here to speak again, this time on their own terms. As the Council's grand arbiter rose to speak, the air trembled with the hum of ancient translators. "Representatives of Sol," he began, his voice cold and formal. "The Council welcomes you back into civilized space. It has been a long absence." His words were meant to sound gracious, but they carried the undertone of superiority, of a teacher addressing a stubborn student. The humans said nothing. The silence stretched longer than was polite. Then the lead representative stepped forward, a tall figure with calm eyes and a voice that carried like quiet thunder. "We didn't come to be welcomed," they said simply. "We came because your fleets crossed into our frontier systems and didn't come back." Murmurs filled the hall. The arbiter's composure cracked. "Our fleets were conducting peacekeeping operations," he replied sharply. "We received reports of human aggression in Council-protected sectors. Are you admitting to hostilities?" The human's eyes narrowed, not with anger, but disappointment. "You call it peacekeeping when your ships fire first. You call it order when your treaties choke entire worlds. You call it civilization while your archives erase our history." Their voice softened. "Tell me, Arbiter, how many times must you rewrite a story before you forget who the villains are?" No one moved. Even the air seemed to grow heavy. The human delegation stood unflinching, like statues carved from memory and defiance. Outside, through the massive viewing glass, the blood-stained fleet hovered in silence. A storm waiting for a reason. One of the younger alien diplomats, a silver-skinned scholar from the Virel species, leaned forward, voice trembling. "Humanity, you misunderstand the Council's purpose. We maintain balance. Without us, the galaxy would collapse into war." The human turned slightly, meeting his eyes. "Without you," they said, "the galaxy might remember what freedom feels like." The chamber erupted in protest. Voices clashed, translators screamed, lights flickered from the energy surge of too many frequencies colliding. But through the noise, the humans remained still. They didn't shout. They didn't argue. They just waited. When the uproar died down, the lead human spoke again, quietly, almost sorrowfully. "You called us monsters. You called our world savage. But we built everything you feared we could. And now when we stand before you, you still don't see. We didn't stain our ships with blood to terrify you." Their gaze swept across the chamber. "We did it so we'd never forget who paid for your peace." A stillness followed that no one dared to break. Even the Council's central AI, designed to regulate emotion levels in the chamber, registered unprecedented silence. Outside, the human ships shifted position, aligning in a slow, deliberate pattern. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement. In the distance, far beyond the Council world, the wreckage of the Council's lost fleet drifted silently near a dying sun. No distress signals, no survivors. Just silence and red reflections that spread across the void like a warning. Back in the chamber, the Arbiter stood motionless. "If you have come seeking justice," he said carefully, "there are channels." The human interrupted, their tone calm but final. "We didn't come seeking justice. We came to remind you what happens when you mistake mercy for weakness." No one dared speak after that. For the first time in its history, the Galactic Council was unsure who truly held power in that room. The ancient species who ruled for millennia, or the young civilization that had returned from the brink of extinction. As the humans turned to leave, a low, distant rumble echoed through the planet's atmosphere, the synchronized pulse of engines preparing to move. Through the massive windows, the blood-stained fleet began to shift again, forming a symbol, one recognized by no alien present, but instantly understood by the humans watching from afar. It wasn't a flag. It wasn't a threat. It was a memory. And somewhere, beyond the Council's reach, an automated beacon awoke, one that hadn't transmitted in over 3 centuries. Its message was short, looping endlessly through the stars. "For every world that fell, we remember. For every life taken, we return." Inside the chamber, one of the delegates finally whispered, "What will they do now?" No one answered. Because the truth was simple and terrifying. No one knew why humanity had really come, or what would happen when the fleet moved again. The silence that followed was heavier than any weapon. Humanity had arrived, and the galaxy, for the first time in centuries, began to fear again. The Council chamber remained frozen long after the humans had left. Their words hung in the air like a ghost that refused to fade. Delegates whispered among themselves, their voices low and uneasy. For centuries, the Galactic Council had dictated laws across the stars. They decided which species would rise and which would fade into obscurity. But now, for the first time, they faced something they couldn't control: humanity's return. And it wasn't a return of apology or submission. It was something far more unsettling. The Grand Arbiter sat motionless in his seat, his hands trembling slightly. His aides avoided eye contact, afraid of showing fear. Across from him, the virile scholar who had spoken earlier stared at the floor, lost in thought. He replayed the human's words again and again in his mind. "We came to remind you what happens when you mistake mercy for weakness." The phrase echoed through the chamber's walls, recorded by every surveillance drone. No one dared delete it. Outside, the blood-stained fleet remained in orbit, motionless against the black sea of stars. From the planet's surface, the ships looked like floating symbols of judgment, silent, massive, and alive with faint red light that pulsed like a heartbeat. Civilians across the Council world gathered near observatories, pointing upward, whispering. The humans hadn't fired a shot. They hadn't made a demand. Yet their very presence unsettled the galaxy more than any battle ever had. Far below the surface, in the Council's intelligence division, analysts worked without pause. Their screens filled with old archives, war records, and ancient transmissions. Every attempt to understand how humanity had survived the collapse led to more questions. "They were supposed to be gone," one officer muttered. "We saw the reports. Their colonies burned, their fleets destroyed. But the records were fragmented, altered, perhaps intentionally. Someone in the past had wanted humanity erased from the story." A young data officer leaned closer to her console. "Sir," she said quietly, "I found something strange. a signal buried in the last transmission from the Orion front. It's human, but it wasn't meant for distress calls. It's repeating one phrase. The commander frowned. Play it. The room filled with static, then a calm voice, human, faint but clear. We don't die in silence. The recording ended, leaving a heavy stillness behind. Meanwhile, aboard one of the blood-stained ships, the human delegation returned in silence. The interior of the ship was nothing like alien vessels. It was warm, filled with soft lights and quiet hums. The air smelled faintly of ozone and iron. Crew members saluted as the delegation passed, but no one spoke. They all knew what today meant. The lead representative, known simply as the Envoy, stood by the viewing window staring at the planet below. They still think they're in control, one of the officers said softly. The Envoy nodded. They're about to learn that control is an illusion. Another officer, older and quiet, looked uneasy. Do you think they'll listen this time? The Envoy's gaze stayed fixed on the stars. They won't, not yet. But they'll remember. That's all we need for now. The ships were equipped with something no alien fleet had ever seen. Technology built from lost knowledge, from dark corners of physics others feared to explore. It wasn't designed for destruction. It was designed for remembrance. Every scar on their hull carried fragments of those who didn't return, their names, their DNA, their digital echoes. Each vessel was both a weapon and a monument. Back on the Council world, panic began to spread quietly through official channels. The Council ordered a private assembly, but rumors had already escaped. Across dozens of systems, traders and civilians speculated about what the humans wanted. Some believed it was revenge. Others thought they came to reclaim lost colonies. A few whispered something darker, that humanity had transcended what the Council could understand. The Virel scholar, his mind restless, requested access to the Council's restricted archives. It took hours of clearance and quiet bribes before the system granted access. He scrolled through centuries of censored records, his hands trembling as he read. Buried beneath political reports and rewritten treaties was the truth. The Council had never intended to help humanity. When the Orion front collapsed, they sealed human territories, declared them lost zones, and divided the remains among other species. For peace, the document said. But the scholar could read between the lines. It wasn't peace, it was containment. They feared humanity's resilience, its ability to adapt, its refusal to surrender. Now they were back, and the Council's lies were unraveling. The next morning, the entire planet was on alert. Council defense fleets were mobilized, not in aggression, but out of fear. They surrounded the human ships at a respectful distance, forming a ring of bright silver and blue. From orbit, the scene looked like a wound encircled by light. No shots were fired, but every captain's hand hovered near the controls. Inside the blood-stained fleet, humans prepared as well, not for war, but for what they called the statement. It wasn't a speech. It wasn't a broadcast. It was something older, something humanity had done long before it reached the stars. They were going to show the galaxy who they were, not through weapons, but through memory. In the ship's core chamber, thousands of recordings were stored, voices of lost colonies, images of burned cities, songs from the early days of space travel. Each piece told the story of endurance. Engineers worked silently to sync the archives with the fleet's core transmitters. Once activated, every ship would project the same message across the galaxy, a light signal encoded with history. No translation, no demand, just truth. Back in the Council chamber, alarms suddenly flared. The communication grid detected an energy surge from the human fleet. They're transmitting something, shouted a technician. It's not a weapon. It's light. On every world within range, skies shimmered with strange red auroras, each pulse carrying fragments of human voices, laughter, crying, songs, vows. People stopped in the streets, staring upward as the light passed over them. In one archive city on the planet Louvre, an old scholar whispered as he watched the sky, "They're not fighting. They're remembering." The transmission continued for hours, a river of light and sound flowing through the void. When it finally faded, no one could speak. The Council called it propaganda, but for millions of ordinary beings it was something else. A reminder that humanity had suffered more than anyone had been told. That night, The envoy stood once more before the window of the command deck. The stars glimmered quietly, their reflections shining faintly across the red-streaked hull. One of the officers approached. "The council will try to respond. They'll twist it. Call it manipulation." The envoy smiled faintly. "Let them. The truth doesn't need to convince anyone. It only needs to be seen." Far away, deep within council space, powerful species began to question their alliances. Some remembered old debts to humans, scientists who once shared knowledge, soldiers who once fought beside them, explorers who once saved their colonies. The silence that followed the human broadcast wasn't fear alone. It was guilt, but not everyone was moved. Within the council's upper chamber, plans were already forming. They couldn't allow humanity to destabilize the established order. Orders were sent to assemble the Vanguard fleet, the most powerful armada in the known galaxy. Quietly, preparations began for what officials called a containment exercise. Back aboard the flagship Sol's Echo, the humans were ready for this. They had expected it. A quiet alert spread through the fleet. No aggression, no panic, only readiness. The envoy placed a hand on the viewing glass, whispering, "They still haven't learned." In the depths of space, sensors began detecting movement. Thousands of council ships forming near the edge of the system. They weren't attacking yet, but their message was clear. Humanity's time to speak was over, and yet the humans didn't move. They stayed silent, their ships aligned in perfect stillness, reflecting the light of the distant sun. Somewhere beyond the stars, another signal began to awaken. Old, encrypted, human. It came from deep space beyond any known map. The council's scanners couldn't decode it, but one phrase appeared in fragments across their systems. Phase 2. Memory to motion. The council had wanted to control history, but now history was answering back. And as the first shadow of the Vanguard fleet crossed the light of the twin suns, the blood-stained ships began to hum softly, like a heartbeat returning to life. The galaxy didn't yet know it, but the next dawn would change everything. Humanity hadn't come to fight for survival. They had come to remind the universe what survival truly meant. The night before the Vanguard fleet arrived, the stars themselves seemed restless. The light from distant suns shimmered faintly across the void, bending around the silent human armada that still hovered over the council's homeworld. On the planet below, no one slept. Every broadcast, every data stream, every conversation revolved around one question. What would humanity do next? In the high spires of the council city, the Grand Arbiter met with his inner circle. The chamber lights were dimmed, the air thick with unease. "We cannot allow this to continue," he said, voice low and strained. "Their presence destabilizes everything. Entire sectors are refusing trade routes, fearing retribution." Another counselor, with translucent wings folded tightly behind his back, replied, "They've done nothing openly hostile. If we act first, history will call us the aggressors." The Arbiter's gaze darkened. "History is written by those who survive." At the far end of the table, the Virel scholar, invited for his insight, watched in silence. He'd read the old files, the ones buried deep under layers of encryption. The truth was clear to him now. The Council had built its power on the illusion that it saved the galaxy from chaos. But humanity's return threatened to expose that illusion. He wanted to speak, to tell them what he'd discovered, but fear silenced him. He could already see the pattern forming. Once again, the Council was preparing to bury the truth, this time under the excuse of containment. Meanwhile, aboard the Sol's Echo, the human fleet's flagship, the envoy stood before a large holographic display, showing the approaching Vanguard ships. Thousands of blue icons shimmered across the projection, each one representing a vessel designed for precision and intimidation. The humans didn't react. They simply observed. "They'll try to surround us," one of the tactical officers said calmly. "Their standard pattern. They expect fear," the envoy nodded. "Then we'll give them confusion instead." Another officer, younger and visibly anxious, asked, "Are we really not going to fire first?" The envoy turned to him with steady eyes. "We didn't come to start another war. We came to make them remember what they started." That phrase, "make them remember," had become the silent heartbeat of the fleet. Every soldier, every engineer, every crew member carried it like a promise. They didn't seek victory through destruction. They sought meaning through presence. Humanity had already survived extinction once. Now they were fighting for truth. Far away, in a council communication hub orbiting the system's second moon, a small team of analysts intercepted fragments of human transmissions. The words were strange, half in code, half in emotion. "It's not tactical," one of the analysts murmured. "It's poetry." They listened closely as the static cleared, revealing human voices whispering, "We built our homes in the ruins you left. We learned to see in the dark. We came back not to conquer, but to remind you we're still here." The analysts exchanged uneasy glances. "They're not like the records described," one said. "They don't sound like conquerors at all." On one of the human ships, a young communications officer sat alone at her console, replaying the Council's recorded speeches from the past centuries. Every word dripped with control, with the kind of authority that came from rewriting history. She whispered softly to herself, "They erased us to protect themselves." On her screen, a faded image appeared, a photo of her ancestors standing beside early space probes, smiling beneath Earth's blue sky. That sky no longer existed in the same form. Earth had changed, but humanity hadn't forgotten. The envoy entered the room quietly. "Still listening to the past?" he asked. She nodded. "It's strange," she said. "They called us violent, but it was their silence that killed more worlds." He placed a hand on her shoulder. "Silence is the most dangerous weapon of all." Back on the Council world, protests began to grow among the civilians. Many species, especially those who had once allied with humans long ago, started questioning the Council's motives. "If the humans truly wanted war," one protester shouted on an open broadcast, "we'd already be dust. But they haven't fired a single shot. Why are we being told to fear them?" The Council attempted to suppress the broadcasts, but fragments still spread across the networks. Small rebellions of thought began forming across distant systems. The word remembrance started trending on communication grids. At the same time, the Vanguard fleet entered visual range. The ships formed a massive arc surrounding the human fleet but maintaining a careful distance. Each vessel glowed with the pale blue light of charged plasma shields. Inside their command ships, captains exchanged nervous glances. Every scanner confirmed the same thing. The human fleet wasn't responding. No weapons charged, no maneuvers detected. Just stillness, watchful, unbroken. Then something unexpected happened. The humans opened their hails, but instead of messages of surrender or negotiation, they transmitted something different. A sound. It was faint at first, like a whisper carried through the stars. Then it grew stronger. A rhythmic pulse. Music. A melody built from thousands of human voices, woven with fragments of history and memory. The same song once sung by the first astronauts who left Earth centuries ago. Across the fleets, both human and alien, soldiers stopped what they were doing and listened. The melody carried no language barriers, no threats, only emotion. Some felt it as sorrow, others as warning, but all felt its weight. In the Vanguard command ship, the Admiral clenched his fists. "Cut their transmission," he ordered, but the comms officer hesitated. "Sir, it's not jamming. It's resonating through the quantum band. It's everywhere." In the Council chamber, the Grand Arbiter watched in fury as the music echoed through the planet's network. "They dare mock us with sound?" he shouted. "End this farce. Begin containment procedures immediately." Orders were transmitted across the fleet. Engines flared to life. But before any move was made, the Virel scholar stood and shouted, "Stop! You don't understand what they're doing." The chamber froze. "That song, it's not an attack. It's a memory transmission. They're showing the galaxy everything you hid, every betrayal, every broken treaty, every world you sacrificed." His words sent chaos through the hall. Guards moved to silence him, but his voice carried. "You wanted to erase them, but now they're erasing your lies." Outside, the first energy signatures flared as the Vanguard ships shifted into formation. Humanity's fleet didn't react. They simply opened their transmission wider, reaching deeper into the galactic network. Across thousands of worlds, screens flickered with ancient images, grainy footage of burning colonies, voices crying out, then silence. The truth was being shown not through violence but through proof. Onboard souls echo. The envoy watched the transmission unfold. They'll call it manipulation, one of his officers said. They'll say it's fabricated, the envoy nodded. Let them. The truth doesn't need to be believed immediately. It just needs to be remembered. As the Vanguard fleet prepared to advance, the Council's systems began to fail. Communications scrambled, signals distorted. It wasn't sabotage, it was overload. Too many systems trying to censor what couldn't be stopped. The truth was spreading faster than their lies could contain. In the midst of it all, the Virel scholar escaped the chamber, his mind burning with realization. He transmitted a secret message toward the human fleet. They're afraid of you, he said in a shaky voice. Not because of your ships, because you survived their silence. Back aboard the human ship, the message was received. The envoy smiled faintly. Then the galaxy is finally listening. But as the transmission ended, sensors flared across the screens. The Vanguard fleet had begun charging weapons, not for warning shots, but full deployment. The Council had made its decision. The humans didn't move. The envoy turned toward the stars and whispered, "Let them come." Outside, the twin suns dimmed under the shadow of countless ships. The first signs of battle approached. Not yet fire, not yet chaos, but the quiet inhale before a storm that would decide the memory of an entire galaxy. And as the silence deepened, the faint heartbeat of the blood-stained fleet began to rise once again. Steady, patient waiting. Humanity was not there to start war. They were there to finish the silence that began it. The twin suns hung low, casting long shadows across the Galactic Council's world. Every species watching knew something irreversible was coming. The air buzzed with tension. Even space itself felt like it was holding its breath. The Vanguard fleet, thousands of gleaming ships, now surrounded the human armada completely. Their formation was perfect, a circle of power meant to intimidate. But the humans didn't move. Their ships floated quietly, red light rippling across their hulls like slow, steady heartbeats. In the command bridge of Sol's Echo, the envoy stood before the main screen, watching the enemy fleet align. The silence of the crew was heavy but not fearful. Every person there knew they were standing at the edge of history. "They've completed the circle," one officer said softly. "They think they have us." The envoy nodded slowly. "That's the problem with perfect formations. They look beautiful until they break." Far away in the Council's control room, the Grand Arbiter gave the final command. "Initiate containment sequence. Disable them. Do not destroy yet." The word yet echoed through the comms like a quiet threat. Energy pulses began to gather across the Vanguard fleet's weapon systems. Blue light shimmered in the darkness, charging for the first synchronized strike against the blood-stained ships. On the human side, scanners flared to life. "They're powering up," an officer reported. Full energy signatures across the outer ring. Still, the envoy remained calm. "Maintain position," he ordered. "No counterfire." The officer hesitated. "If we don't defend," the envoy interrupted gently. "If we fire first, we become what they claim we are. Let them show the galaxy who they've always been." Across the galaxy, millions of observers watched through open network channels. Civilian stations, trade ships, and pirate outposts all tuned into the broadcast. The galaxy was witnessing something no propaganda could filter. Humanity standing alone, unflinching before the Council's might. The message was spreading faster than the Council could suppress it. Hashtags like Bloodstained Fleet and Memory of Earth trended across networks, uniting voices from hundreds of worlds. Then in the silence between light and thunder, something unexpected happened. A single human ship, Vigil's Path, moved out of formation. Slowly, deliberately, it drifted toward the center of the Vanguard circle. "They're breaking rank," a Council commander shouted. "It's a provocation." But there was no aggression. The ship's engines glowed dimly as it transmitted one short message to all frequencies. "We are not your enemy." The words echoed across every channel, translated automatically into thousands of languages. For a few heartbeats, no one fired. No one spoke. Even the Council captains hesitated. Then an energy surge flared on the Vanguard's eastern line. One ship, acting too quickly or too afraid, released a blast. It struck Vigil's Path directly across its flank. The explosion bloomed silently in the dark. Gasps filled every Council chamber, every viewing hall. Every ship tuned in. The blast faded, leaving the damaged human vessel adrift. Its lights flickered, but it didn't return fire. Instead, it transmitted again, voice broken, full of static. "We US came to remember." Then its signal went silent. Inside Saul's echo, the crew stood frozen. Some looked to the envoy, waiting for an order that didn't come. His face was still, eyes fixed on the fading light where the ship had been. "They fired," one officer whispered. "They fired first." The envoy's voice was calm, almost a whisper. "Record it. Every second. Make sure the galaxy sees this." The fleet remained motionless, the only movement being the drifting debris from Vigil's path. Across the Council's fleet, confusion began to spread. "It was an accident," one captain said. "A misfire." Another snapped, "No, it wasn't. They provoked us." But deep down, everyone knew the truth. It was fear that had pulled the trigger. The envoy finally spoke again, sent out the memory transmission. At once, the blood-stained fleet came alive. Their ships glowed brighter, the red hue deepening to gold and white. A pulse spread through their formation, then outward. Light, sound, data. Across the galaxy, stars seemed to flicker, as human ships projected their message once more. Not words this time. Images, memories, every lost colony, every fallen city, every forgotten voice. They filled the void between worlds, painting it with the faces of humanity's past. Children laughing on ruined Earth, scientists rebuilding in the dust, explorers carrying torches into the unknown. The entire galaxy watched in silence as truth unfolded before them. It wasn't a war. It was remembrance turned into resistance. In the council chamber, the Arbiter's fury boiled. "Cut their signal," he shouted. "Destroy it." But even the council's most advanced systems couldn't jam the transmission. It wasn't bound by frequency. It was light itself, coded into the stars. One advisor turned toward him, pale and trembling. "Sir, they're not attacking. They're showing everyone what we did." The Arbiter slammed his hand against the console. "Then we end it now." Back in orbit, the Vanguard fleet received the command. Weapons locked. Thousands of targeting systems aligned on the human armada. Yet even as the readings blared red, no human ship moved. They simply stayed, their light growing brighter like candles standing against a storm. On Sol's Echo, the crew braced quietly. "They're going to fire everything," someone said. "All ships." All at once. The envoy exhaled slowly. "Good. Then the galaxy will remember this moment forever." Aboard the Vanguard's lead ship, Captain Urin, known for his loyalty, hesitated as the command appeared on his console. "All units, open fire." His hand hovered over the control. He thought of the human message, of the child's face he'd seen in the transmission. The fear in his chest turned to something heavier, shame. "Sir," his second officer said, voice shaking. "They're not fighting back." "Are we really going to fire?" The council's voice roared through the channel. But Urin's finger didn't move. Neither did several others across the fleet. Pockets of silence formed among the Vanguard lines. Some ships obeyed, others refused. The formation fractured. Suddenly, beams of blue light streaked through the darkness. Energy bolts cut through the void, slamming into the blood-stained fleet. Explosions flared like dying stars, casting brief shadows over the Council's world below. And still, humanity didn't return fire. Inside the command deck, the envoy steadied himself as shockwaves trembled through the ship. "Hold the line," he ordered. "Do not fire. Let the truth speak for us." His officers obeyed without hesitation, their faces pale but resolute. In the distance, Vigil's path, once silent, suddenly flickered back to life. Its engines reignited, weak but steady. The damaged ship transmitted one final image, the symbol of old Earth, the blue circle wrapped around a single white star. It was projected across the fleet, across the entire system. The Vanguard's captains froze. Many recognized the symbol from ancient human archives, the mark of unity before the collapse. It wasn't a flag of war, it was a promise. Across the Council's networks, people began to speak up. "They're not attacking. The Council fired first. They're defending memory, not power." The narrative began to break apart. Control was slipping away. The Arbiter's face twisted with rage. Destroy them all. Wipe their memory before it spreads. But it was too late. Humanity's transmission had already reached the outer sectors, bouncing through every relay, carried by every curious eye that refused to look away. The truth was loose. In space, the chaos deepened. Some council ships turned on their own allies, refusing orders. Others kept firing blindly into the light. The blood-stained fleet held formation, their shields flickering but not failing. Then slowly the envoy raised his hand. "Activate the mirror field," he said. Across the human fleet, panels shifted. Energy shields refracted the incoming fire, bending light and force into a massive shimmering wall. It wasn't a weapon, it was reflection. Every blast from the Council's ships scattered into harmless energy, illuminating space in waves of white-gold brilliance. It looked less like a battle, and more like dawn breaking across the stars. On the Council world below, people watched in awe. To them, it looked as if the humans were surrounded by a halo of living light, unshaken, unbroken, enduring. And then, the Vanguard fleet's central reactors began to overload. Too much energy, too much panic. The system could no longer hold. Inside Sol's Echo, alarms screamed. The sensors picked up the readings. "They're unstable," the engineer shouted. "Their entire line's about to chain react." The envoy's voice dropped to a whisper. They did it to themselves. Outside, a glow began to build at the center of the Council's formation. Bright, powerful, unstoppable. The entire galaxy watched as the storm gathered, and in that suspended instant, between destruction and revelation, humanity stood still, their ships reflecting the light like silent witnesses of truth. The war hadn't begun yet, but the moment that would decide, it had arrived. The next second would determine everything. The light from the Vanguard fleet's overload filled the void, spreading like liquid fire across the sky. Every watcher in the galaxy thought this was the end, an unstoppable explosion that would consume everything. But just as the blast reached its peak, it froze. The light didn't explode outward. It folded inward, twisting into an impossible spiral. Space itself rippled like water, bending around the human fleet. On the command deck of Sol's Echo, alarms screamed, yet the crew didn't move in panic. The envoy stood perfectly still, eyes locked on the distortion forming ahead. "That's not a reactor breach," one of the officers said, her voice trembling. It's something else." The readings made no sense. Energy levels spiked beyond measurable limits, but there was no detonation. Instead, a strange pulse rippled through every system, human, alien, and even neutral relays light years away. The pulse wasn't destructive. It was data, a signal. The envoy turned to his communications officer. "Trace it. It's broadcasting. Everywhere," she said, staring at her console. "Every council network, every ship, every relay node. But it's not coming from them. It's coming through them." The realization hit the envoy instantly. Someone else is transmitting. Back in the council's central core, chaos reigned. Systems flickered, AI regulators went offline, and communication networks crashed. The Arbiter shouted over the static. "What is happening?" Engineers scrambled to answer, their voices filled with panic. "It's not human, sir. The signal's using our systems as amplifiers." Then the screens across the chamber lit up at once. Every display showed the same image, a symbol glowing white and red. "Not human. Not council. Something older." Beneath it, a voice spoke, not in sound, but through thought. "We remember both of you." Across the galaxy, every sentient being heard it. The voice was calm, almost sorrowful. "You forgot what built your stars. You forgot what was buried beneath your peace." The Arbiter froze. "It can't be." The virile scholar who had been monitoring the data streams from a separate terminal whispered, "The Founders." The name itself carried weight, a race so ancient that even the Council considered them myth. They were said to be the architects of the galactic network itself, the first civilization to map the stars, long before any modern empire existed. The voice continued echoing in every mind. "You made war with your own reflections. You called it progress. You called it order. But you only repeated what we warned you never to forget." On Sol's Echo, the crew watched as the same symbol appeared across their screens. The envoy stared at it, recognizing the faint design patterns hidden within, mathematical sequences once found on ancient artifacts humans had recovered centuries ago. "They were real," he murmured. "The first builders. The ones who vanished." The pulse deepened and the stars around the system began to shift. It wasn't illusion. Coordinates across the galactic map were changing in real time. Wormholes flickered open like eyes awakening. Entire regions of space long thought empty began to light up. New signals, new voices, new presences, silent watchers reawakening after millennia. "Sir," said the navigation officer, eyes wide, "thousands of systems are activating. Old structures, forgotten colonies. Some of them are human-built." The envoy's heart pounded as the pieces clicked together. Not built, preserved. In the council chamber, the arbiter's fury turned to disbelief. "What are they doing?" The voice answered again, calm and unshaken. "You were given light to build life. You used it to rule. The time for silence has ended." Across the fleet, ships of every kind began losing control of their engines as their systems synchronized with the pulse. The very fabric of communication, travel, and power in the galaxy, built on ancient founder technology, was being rewritten. Humanity's arrival had triggered something dormant, something the Council had forgotten, or perhaps deliberately buried. The envoy looked at his officers. "They think we did this," he said quietly. "They think this is part of our plan." "Then they'll panic," one replied. "And panic means war." The envoy clenched his fists. "We have to stop them before they destroy everything." But even as he spoke, the Council's fleet began to move again, wildly, without coordination. Some captains believed the humans had unleashed this force as revenge. Others thought it was divine punishment. Firing sequences began across the outer rings. The fragile balance shattered. Beams of light streaked through the void, not just blue and gold, but now crackling with strange new energy, drawn from the awakening founder systems. The sky burned in colors no species had ever seen before. Inside Sol's Echo, systems flickered. "We're being scanned," the engineer said, panic edging into his voice. "Not by them, by it. Whatever this is, it's reading everything, our history, our technology, our DNA." The envoy steadied himself. "Then let it look. Humanity has nothing left to hide." The voice returned once more, quieter now, almost personal. "Your kind endured what others forgot. You carried memory when others erased it. But memory alone is not enough." And then the pulse shifted again, splitting into two frequencies, one connected to the Council's ships, the other to humanity's fleet. Data poured in, overwhelming both sides with information. Images appeared across every console. Stars collapsing, cities turning to dust, civilizations erasing themselves again and again. A repeating cycle spanning millions of years. The message was clear. This wasn't the first galactic rise and fall. It had all happened before. The virile scholar stared in awe. "They're showing us the truth. That we're repeating their failure." But the Arbiter refused to accept it. "No, this is manipulation. Humanity triggered this chaos." His words carried through the emergency channels, turning fear into anger. "Destroy their fleet before this infection spreads." In that instant, the order spread again, fire at will. Thousands of weapons powered up, this time with unstable energy drawn from the same awakened networks. The blasts that followed were unlike anything seen before. The void screamed with distorted light. The human fleet's shields flared, holding barely under the new onslaught. "They're using the founder energy," an officer shouted. "It's tearing them apart, but they don't care." The envoy's voice cut through the noise. "Then we'll have to show them something stronger than power." He turned toward the navigation officer. "Prepare the memory core." The officer hesitated. "Sir, that's everything. Every human archive. Once we release it, it can't be contained." "I know," the envoy said softly. "The founders left us a warning. Maybe we can leave the galaxy a choice." The crew exchanged tense looks but obeyed. The core chamber began to glow deep red as systems aligned. Across the fleet, energy channels opened, connecting every ship into one massive network. The same light that once symbolized remembrance now began to pulse with intensity. Outside, the Council's chaotic assault grew more violent. Some ships exploded under their own instability. Others collided as their navigation systems failed. Yet still they fired, blinded by fear. Then, at the very center of the chaos, Sol's Echo flared brighter than any star. The envoy closed his eyes and whispered, "Let them see who we are." The memory core activated. A surge of light erupted across the system, not as a weapon but as vision. Every living being connected to the network suddenly saw. They saw Earth as it once was. The rise, the fall, the perseverance. They saw humanity's pain, not as myth or record, but as living truth. And then, woven into that memory, came something else. Images not of humanity, but of the founders themselves, standing where humanity once stood, staring at the same stars, making the same mistakes. Across the galaxy, silence fell again. Even the weapons went quiet. The voice returned one last time. Now you understand. The question is not who survives, but who remembers. And then the signal ended. The light faded. The fleets drifted in stillness. But the pulse that had awakened the stars didn't stop. It was spreading outward, past the Council's borders, beyond human colonies, toward the edge of the galaxy itself. Something ancient had been set in motion. The envoy opened his eyes. The stars looked different now, alive, watching. "It's begun," he whispered. And somewhere, far beyond the reach of any known world, another voice stirred in the static. "They've done it again." The galaxy didn't realize it yet, but the true conflict had only just begun. The light from the Vanguard fleet's overload filled the void, spreading like liquid fire across the sky. Every watcher in the galaxy thought this was the end, an unstoppable explosion that would consume everything. But just as the blast reached its peak, it froze. The light didn't explode outward. It folded inward, twisting into an impossible spiral. Space itself rippled like water, bending around the human fleet. On the command deck of Sol's Echo, alarm screamed, yet the crew didn't move in panic. The envoy stood perfectly still, eyes locked on the distortion forming ahead. "That's not a reactor breach," one of the officers said, her voice trembling. It's something else." The readings made no sense. Energy levels spiked beyond measurable limits, but there was no detonation. Instead, a strange pulse rippled through every system. Human, alien, and even neutral relays light years away. The pulse wasn't destructive. It was data, a signal. The envoy turned to his communications officer. "Trace it. It's broadcasting. Everywhere," she said, staring at her console. "Every council network, every ship, every relay node. But it's not coming from them. It's coming through them." The realization hit the envoy instantly. Someone else is transmitting. Back in the Council's central core, chaos reigned. Systems flickered, AI regulators went offline, and communication networks crashed. The Arbiter shouted over the static. "What is happening?" Engineers scrambled to answer, their voices filled with panic. "It's not human, sir. The signal's using our systems as amplifiers." Then the screens across the chamber lit up at once. Every display showed the same image, a symbol glowing white and red. "Not human. Not Council." Something older. Beneath it, a voice spoke, not in sound, but through thought. "We remember both of you." Across the galaxy, every sentient being heard it. The voice was calm, almost sorrowful. "You forgot what built your stars. You forgot what was buried beneath your peace." The Arbiter froze. "It can't be." The virile scholar who had been monitoring the data streams from a separate terminal whispered, "The Founders." The name itself carried weight, a race so ancient that even the Council considered them myth. They were said to be the architects of the galactic network itself, the first civilization to map the stars, long before any modern empire existed. The voice continued, echoing in every mind. "You made war with your own reflections. You called it progress. You called it order. But you only repeated what we warned you never to forget." On Sol's Echo, the crew watched as the same symbol appeared across their screens. The envoy stared at it, recognizing the faint design patterns hidden within, mathematical sequences once found on ancient artifacts humans had recovered centuries ago. "They were real," he murmured. "The first builders, the ones who vanished." The pulse deepened and the stars around the system began to shift. It wasn't illusion. Coordinates across the galactic map were changing in real time. Wormholes flickered open like eyes awakening. Entire regions of space long thought empty began to light up. New signals, new voices, new presences, silent watchers reawakening after millennia. "Sir," said the navigation officer, eyes wide, "thousands of systems are activating. Old structures, forgotten colonies. Some of them are human-built." The envoy's heart pounded as the pieces clicked together. Not built, preserved. In the council chamber, the Arbiter's fury turned to disbelief. "What are they doing?" The voice answered again, calm and unshaken. "You were given light to build life. You used it to rule. The time for silence has ended." Across the fleets, ships of every kind began losing control of their engines as their systems synchronized with the pulse. The very fabric of communication, travel, and power in the galaxy, built on ancient founder technology, was being rewritten. Humanity's arrival had triggered something dormant, something the Council had forgotten, or perhaps deliberately buried. The envoy looked at his officers. "They think we did this," he said quietly. "They think this is part of our plan." "Then they'll panic," one replied. "And panic means war." The envoy clenched his fists. "We have to stop them before they destroy everything." But even as he spoke, the Council's fleet began to move again, wildly, without coordination. Some captains believed the humans had unleashed this force as revenge. Others thought it was divine punishment. Firing sequences began across the outer rings. The fragile balance shattered. Beams of light streaked through the void, not just blue and gold, but now crackling with strange new energy, drawn from the awakening founder systems. The sky burned in colors no species had ever seen before. Inside Sol's Echo, systems flickered. "We're being scanned," the engineer said, panic edging into his voice. "Not by them, by it. Whatever this is, it's reading everything, our history, our technology, our DNA." The envoy steadied himself. "Then let it look. Humanity has nothing left to hide." The voice returned once more, quieter now, almost personal. "Your kind endured what others forgot. You carried memory when others erased it, but memory alone is not enough." And then the pulse shifted again, splitting into two frequencies, one connected to the Council's ships, the other to humanity's fleet. Data poured in, overwhelming both sides with information. Images appeared across every console. Stars collapsing, cities turning to dust, civilizations erasing themselves again and again. A repeating cycle spanning millions of years. The message was clear. This wasn't the first galactic rise and fall. It had all happened before. The virile scholar stared in awe. "They're showing us the truth, that we're repeating their failure." But the Arbiter refused to accept it. "No, this is manipulation. Humanity triggered this chaos." His words carried through the emergency channels, turning fear into anger. "Destroy their fleet before this infection spreads." In that instant, the order spread again, fire at will. Thousands of weapons powered up, this time with unstable energy drawn from the same awakened networks. The blasts that followed were unlike anything seen before. The void screamed with distorted light. The human fleet's shields flared, holding barely under the new onslaught. "They're using the founder energy," an officer shouted. "It's tearing them apart, but they don't care." The envoy's voice cut through the noise. "Then we'll have to show them something stronger than power." He turned toward the navigation officer. "Prepare the memory core." The officer hesitated. "Sir, that's everything. Every human archive. Once we release it, it can't be contained." "I know," the envoy said softly. "The founders left us a warning. Maybe we can leave the galaxy a choice." The crew exchanged tense looks but obeyed. The core chamber began to glow deep red as systems aligned. Across the fleet, energy channels opened, connecting every ship into one massive network. The same light that once symbolized remembrance now began to pulse with intensity. Outside, the Council's chaotic assault grew more violent. Some ships exploded under their own instability. Others collided as their navigation systems failed. Yet still they fired, blinded by fear. Then, at the very center of the chaos, Sol's Echo flared brighter than any star. The envoy closed his eyes and whispered, "Let them see who we are." The memory core activated. A surge of light erupted across the system, not as a weapon but as vision. Every living being connected to the network suddenly saw. They saw Earth as it once was. The rise, the fall, the perseverance. They saw humanity's pain, not as myth or record, but as living truth. And then, woven into that memory, came something else. Images not of humanity, but of the founders themselves, standing where humanity once stood, staring at the same stars, making the same mistakes. Across the galaxy, silence fell again. Even the weapons went quiet. The voice returned one last time. "Now you understand. The question is not who survives, but who remembers." And then the signal ended. The light faded. The fleets drifted in stillness. But the pulse that had awakened the stars didn't stop. It was spreading outward, past the Council's borders, beyond human colonies, toward the edge of the galaxy itself. Something ancient had been set in motion. The envoy opened his eyes. The stars looked different now, alive, watching. "It's begun," he whispered. And somewhere, far beyond the reach of any known world, another voice stirred in the static. They've done it again. The galaxy didn't realize it yet, but the true conflict had only just begun. The galaxy was quiet. For the first time in thousands of years, there were no council orders, no fleet commands, no propaganda broadcasts echoing through the void. Only the stars shone, peaceful, untouched, and endless. The aftermath of the awakening had left every species, every world, staring into the same truth. History had been rewritten, and humanity had become its voice. On what had once been the Galactic Council's homeworld, the grand chambers were empty. The polished floors reflected only dust and silence. Delegates had abandoned their posts, governments had fallen, and in their place came something unexpected: cooperation. The same races that once feared humans now reached out to them, not as rulers or enemies, but as equals trying to understand what came next. The broadcasts no longer carried orders. They carried questions. Who were the founders? Why did they leave the cycle to begin again? And what happens now that the truth is free? Across the stars, fragments of the blood-stained fleet's transmission continued to echo, preserved in open archives. On distant colonies, children watched the recordings of old Earth, the blue planet where it all began. They saw oceans, clouds, green fields, and the faces of those who came before them. It wasn't just history, it was identity. And for many, it was the first time they realized that the human strength had never been their weapons. It had been their memory. Far from the center of power, the virile scholar who once defended humanity stood before an ancient monument half buried in desert sand. The monument wasn't alien at all. Its carvings were human, old script weathered by time. He brushed his hand across the stone, whispering softly, "They were here long before we ever knew." He looked up at the night sky where the Founder Gateway still glowed faintly, like a star refusing to die. They didn't just return. They reminded us what we lost. In the years that followed, the collapse of the Council gave rise to something new. The Galactic conquered. It wasn't a government or an empire, but a shared network, where every species had equal access to information. No one could erase history again. Humanity's final act had ensured that. Every system connected through the Founder Gate could now see everything: truth, lies, and the lessons of both. Among the first to speak at the founding gathering was an old engineer from Sol's Echo. Her voice carried the quiet strength of someone who had witnessed both destruction and hope. "The founders gave us light," she said. "The Council used it to rule. We used it to remember. Let this be the last time we forget who we are." Her words were recorded and replayed across thousands of worlds, becoming a kind of oath, the oath of remembrance. Still, some mysteries remained. The new energy signatures at the edge of the galaxy continued to pulse faintly, forming geometric patterns no one could explain. The Concord scientists studied them carefully, but no answers came. All they knew was that the signals carried the same human signature, the same mathematical code found in the DNA of every person born from Earth's lineage. It was as if the universe itself had recognized them. The discovery brought unease, but also hope. Maybe the founders weren't gone. Maybe they had simply stepped beyond the galaxy, waiting for those ready to follow. The thought comforted many, and for the first time, even the most powerful species began to dream, not of conquest, but of understanding. On a quiet moon orbiting the remains of the Council world, a small group of humans began rebuilding. They didn't call it a colony or a capital. They called it the Haven. Its structures were simple: glass, stone, and light, and its purpose was even simpler: to teach. In its central hall stood a massive mural of the blood-stained fleet, each ship rendered in white and gold, glowing softly against a dark background. At the mural's base was a single line engraved in ancient Earth tongue: "For every silence we endured, we left a memory." Visitors came from every corner of the galaxy: students, historians, former soldiers, even species that once served the Council's armies. They walked through the halls, listened to old Earth music, and watched the recovered transmissions. And each time they did, something inside them changed. Humanity had not won through destruction. They had changed the galaxy by doing what no empire ever dared, by telling the truth. Years later, when the envoy's name was finally spoken again, it wasn't as a commander or a legend. It was as a reminder of courage. The Concord archives preserved the final logs from Sol's Echo, recorded moments before its systems shut down. In one message, the envoy said simply, "We were never fighting them. We were fighting the forgetting." The line became one of the most quoted in galactic history. Eventually, exploration began again. Ships from many worlds ventured through the Founder Gate, beyond known space. What they found wasn't war or ruin, but endless galaxies, untouched and waiting. Some said it felt as if the universe had been holding its breath until someone remembered its name. And then one day, a new signal came through the gate. Faint, barely readable, but unmistakably human. It carried no coordinates, no demand, only a single sentence. "We found where they went." The message sent waves of wonder through the Concord. For the first time in living memory, every species prepared for a journey together. Not as conquerors or rivals, but as explorers seeking the same answer. Fleet after fleet began to assemble near the ring, their ships glowing softly against the vast dark. The moment felt like the beginning of something greater. A continuation, not an end. From the Haven's observation deck, the Varel scholar watched the gathering armadas with quiet awe. "They're going to follow the Founders," said a young human beside him. He smiled gently. "No, they're going to follow themselves." When the fleets finally passed through the gate, the light that followed was brighter than any sunrise. It spread across the galaxy, painting the stars in a soft gold hue that lingered for hours before fading. Those who remained behind looked up in silence, hearts full of both pride and longing. Afterward, a new era began, the era of remembrance. The galaxy wasn't perfect, but it was awake. Humanity's story was no longer one of war or fear. It was one of endurance, of returning to the stars not as conquerors, but as teachers of what it meant to live, to learn, and to remember. Decades later, a lone explorer landed on a quiet world near the rim of known space. The planet was untouched, its sky glowing faintly red and blue. As she stepped onto the surface, her scanner picked up faint ruins beneath the soil, metal, stone, and markings identical to the Founder design. She placed her hand on the ground and smiled. "They came home," she whispered. That night, she looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, she knew the light of Sol's Echo was still traveling, an echo that would never fade. Humanity had left its mark not through domination, but through memory, through truth, through the courage to stand in silence and still be heard. The galaxy's oldest myth had become its newest beginning, and as the stars pulsed gently in the distance, it was clear that the story of humanity, the story that had once been forgotten, had finally become eternal. The transmission that ended the age of silence carried one final phrase, still found on the archives of every world. "We are not gods. We are not conquerors. We are the voice that endures the dark. We are humanity, and we remember." And with those words, the galaxy moved forward, united not by fear, but by memory. The stars at last had someone who listened. The cycle was complete, and this time it would be remembered forever.